This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. It is the last week of January 2025 and the second week of the second Trump administration. We're already amid a constitutional crisis over which branch has the power of the federal purse. It's Congress, by the way. And a myriad of other intense debates over the direction of the country. Things feel chaotic and unstable, and it's been underscored by a tragic passenger plane military helicopter crash over Washington, D.C. that left scores dead and wreckage in the Potomac River. Government and politics has been remarkably stable over the last few decades, so the last near decade or so has been jarring. But the kind of instability we are experiencing now would not be unfamiliar to people in the 1960s and 1970s, a truly violent space. When political leaders were assassinated with seeming regularity, the Vietnam War forced Americans to debate what their role in the world should be, and a series of domestic struggles and political strife culminated in the resignation of a president. And yet, the political and governmental system keeps plugging away. This week saw the first congressional special elections of 2025. The courts started refereeing the money debate between the president and Congress. A senator announced his retirement. So, can the current system withstand the current storm? Here to reveal all is Nathan Gonzalez, Roll Call's elections analyst and the publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, welcome back. It's good to see you. I apologize for being kind of heavy at the beginning there, but it does seem heavy. It's been a long week, that started with the White House announcing that it was freezing, all federal grants that came unfrozen, a couple of days later. But that was preceded by several firings in the federal government, including inspectors general, the head of the EEOC, NLRB. I mean, it's been a really rough, kind of warp speed kind of environment. And then when the plane and helicopter crash happened, and this happened the evening before we're reporting this podcast, it just sort of hung over like just how again unstable and chaotic the current environment feels. So I apologize for going so heavy right now, but it's just sort of a reflection of reality.
Yeah, and it's the accident, just an incredible, horrible tragedy. And for those of us that live in DC, it's a local story, right? I mean, on Wednesday night, I was driving one of our middle schoolers and some friends home, and we were on the Parkway, and we had to pause before we're getting onto 395. It's just a stream of emergency vehicles. We're just, racing to the scene, and it's horrible. And then waking up on Thursday morning and trying to explain what happened to my 8-year-old, who now says he doesn't, he's nervous about flying, and just, unfortunately the world we live in, and just horrible unfathomable for those families, that had people on either the helicopter or the plane. It's terrible.
Yeah. And again, I feel like it underscores how just, how people are not doing well. There's a lot of it feels rough when you're on the metro, when you're at work. People are just kind of on edge. And again, this, the election that we just went through was rough also. Donald Trump, survived 2 assassination attempts in the course of the campaign. There just this past week, we found out that somebody took a tour of the United States Capitol and had a gun, tucked into his belt that somehow went undetected. There was intervention on somebody who was like trying to, work up Molotov cocktails, here in DC. I mean, this is like, it's almost, absurd. And then, this is also preceded by, on the very first day, Donald Trump pardoned anyone affiliated with the January 6th attack on the Capitol. This is a issue for a lot of people, particularly the folks who were on Capitol Hill. Some of those folks were in the DC correctional facility there, and they were let out. It just feels it feels rough. But again, I think one of the reasons it does feel so rough is that it has been a relatively stable period of our politics that kind of got interrupted. I mean, we've, debatable when this period of instability started, whether, I think some people want to look at Trump, like in his first run, but I think, can make an argument that this started with maybe, the Tea Party. It could have started with some of the, just the reaction to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So whenever it started, but it was preceded by, presidents usually 1-2 terms. The Congress seemed relatively stable. And I feel like even though these elections have been kind of traumatic, it still underscores that we're still having elections. Yeah. We are still, there is still a system that even if it works imperfectly, it still seems to be working. Is that, as an elections analyst, we like to say, we've said it more than one time, politics never sleeps. We had these elections, where your latest column is about the first retirement and what other retirements might come in the Senate. You said, it's been pretty stable, about 5 per cycle.
Right. Yeah, and I admit I have a vested interest in us continuing to have elections as someone who runs a business called Inside Elections. So, but I think it's also good for the country that we continue to have them and abide by the results. And unfortunately, right now, these times, particularly when there are tragic events, big tragic events that happen, we need to show some restraint from. Right now, the tendency is that everything is immediately political. Everything is immediately partisan. And that is, I don't think, what it should be. On Wednesday night, I thought that the late night press conference by Mayor Muriel Bowser was really on point, along with Senators Jim Moran and Roger Marshall of Kansas and a number of other, leaders in the first responders. I thought it was the right tone, right? It was what we needed. And then there are such platforms like Twitter/X where there's actually a surprisingly large amount of good information you can find, but also a lot of terrible information. You're trying to get information from experts as well as, Philly fan in Texas, like everyone thinks that they're an expert. And we're not good right now at taking a deep breath, waiting for information and sort of letting things settle before jumping to any conclusions. And this goes even to the 2024 elections, right? People, let's wait till all the votes are counted before we know and before we know and make assumptions on who won and what actually happened. So I want to try to be optimistic. I do try to be an optimistic person, Jason, but sometimes it's hard because people immediately go to the political and the partisan, and sometimes that's just not helpful or appropriate.
Right. No, I get that. Oh, and by the way, I should note that because I have my own correction later on in this podcast when we talk about words of the week. Jerry Moran, you're thinking?
Oh, yes.
You said Jim Moran, but that's an easy mistake because Jim Moran used to represent the area along the Potomac River in Virginia, Alexandria, and so forth. So
thank you. Yes,
just so many.
And my apologies to Senator Moran for that.
Yeah. So many. Members of Congress and their names jostling around in our brains. No, I think that I think the thing that I'm trying to take a longer view of things and of politics because one, I think it just helps. This is what journalism I think should help do is contextualize. What we're not just what's happening, but what's going on. Like not just the fact of like, this happened, but to say like this happened and this has happened, previously, and this is how people, dealt with it or reacted to it or solved it, because it does seem that I mean, there has been it's this uber cliche now to say that Donald Trump is a norms buster, but it he is doing things differently than other presidents have in the past. And one of the things that I find interesting is like, okay, maybe some things do need to be jostled a little bit so that we can evolve. But there also, when you go too far, as we saw with the announcement that the White House was going to freeze, all federal grants that weren't going specifically to individuals like Social Security, that the courts, came in and said, no, this is not the way that our government is set up. You cannot do this, and within days, it was retracted. Like that, and I feel like that's, there's a lot to kind of be frustrated about with government. I saw a headline, I think it was the New York Times recently, is attacking the government always good politics? Well, maybe from a political perspective or campaign perspective, but not when you need like the National Transportation Safety Board to investigate what happened.
Right.
Like at this tragic thing, and not when you want to make sure that people do get their Social Security checks, or the VA does process claims for veterans, or like all the things that government does do that nobody else can do. Like there is this push and pull, and I think that we're just in a very like strange realm where almost everything is up for questioning right now.
Trump starts this second term with a lot of leeway and some of the benefit of the doubt. I think he starts with the benefit of the doubt among close to a majority of Americans because he's still considered this political outsider, even though he's been running for office and or in office for almost a decade. He is considered this outsider, and he has convinced, I would say, close to a majority or more of Americans that government is fundamentally inept and or corrupt. And so with that outsider profile, with that mentality of the government coming in and shaking things up, he has that leeway up to the point where it potentially starts to impact people's daily lives or in important aspects of their life. So it's easy to say, yeah, cut spending, yeah, cut that program. But when that program affects you, then that's when it starts to, then there's maybe a reality check for Trump and Republicans. Now, we're also in a situation where Trump, there is not a lot of accountability for him, right? He is, even though he drops hints about maybe running again constitutionally, that's still not allowed, but he is not likely to face accountability from voters again. He has had some help from the Supreme Court and other courts where he may not face legal accountability for things. And so right now, the only accountability that there is maybe his desire to be liked. and that can be powerful, but that is also takes us into a, interesting territory where he's wanting to shake things up, or the people around him want to shake things up, and he might not really face any consequences.
Right. No, it reminds me a little bit of the, the sort of old saw about the economy. When do people start caring about the economy? And it's usually when they have trouble paying their bills. I mean, when, people really don't care about the national debt unless they think that it affects the price of eggs, say, or if it, affects their mortgage rate or things like that. But, there have been these long swaths of time, when we don't care about elections, because things are relatively good. And then all of a sudden, when things are not good, like the people who say that they can solve everything by simply being elected to the school board, city council, Congress, presidency, it's like, or to throw the bums out who are in, and then the onus is on them. And that's what I was thinking, that this is a really interesting time to have this kind of debate about what kind of shape government, do we want? And because we're just, again, we're in this sort of unstable period. And as you said, very, very nicely, Trump doesn't have a lot of boundaries, other than what he may think they are. I mean, this Congress is pretty compliant for him. I mean, there aren't very many people who are challenging him except for people who are in the minority and have no power.
Right.
And the courts, at least the Supreme Court has given him, a pretty wide berth. Now, the lower courts are the ones that are kind of interesting here, in terms of like the fight. I mean, it was a court here in DC, who put the halt on the spending freeze. So, anyway, so I do want to get back a little bit though, bringing it back to elections. I mean, we've seen, the two elections that we saw in Florida this week were to replace Matt Gaetz and Michael Waltz. Matt Gaetz, who was Trump's initial pick to be attorney general and left Congress and then decided not to take a seat once he dropped out of the attorney general's selection because of questions about his ethics and so forth. And then Michael Waltz became Trump's national security advisor. So there's two vacancies that put the Republican tally in the House at 218 to 215 Democrats. So it's a very slight margin. Those seats will likely be Republican. These are heavily Republican districts.
And just to give people some details, in the first district, Jimmy Patronis, who is Florida's CFO,
statewide elected hold,
won that primary with 66%. Trump finished ahead of Vice President Harris by 38 points in that district. In the 6th district, which is on the eastern coast, kind of south of Jacksonville down to Daytona Beach, I believe Randy Fine, a state senator and I believe a former casino executive, won that primary with a small 83. He got 83% of the vote, so just squeak that out. And Trump won that district by 30 points over Vice President Kamala Harris. So they are very likely, but they will not. The special general elections are on April 1st. So Speaker Johnson is still going to be down, even though we know pretty much who those new members are going to be. He's still not going to have those votes until after those votes are certified and they can be sworn in.
Yeah, it's again, appropriately enough, on April Fool's Day, these elections for those who like to poke fun at Congress. But one of the things that I am struck by is that, I mean, these margins. I mean, the Senate, went 53-47, for the Republicans in this last election, and it's almost as if, the people who observe Congress and certainly the Republicans in the Senate, they almost feel like it would have, like they have like 80 seats. I mean, like having a 3-vote margin is just seems like this immensely cushy, margin. And then, in the House, we've got, the Republicans, have a 5 when all their people are seated, they have a 5-vote margin. And one thing I'm going to try to do, to try to take the temperature down a little bit in my own use of language, is try to avoid like martial and military and violent metaphors when describing politics. So I don't really want to refer to it as trench warfare, which was the first thing that came to me when talking about politics in the battle for the House, or battleground states or things like that. So, but
I'm in trouble. But go ahead. It's hard to have to break, but you're right.
Right. Swing states is what I'm going to prefer. And also it'll make me want to go get coffee at Swings up the street in DC, local coffee company. But I just to, remove that sense of like, any like tiny thing that I can do, I think to sort of get people to think about this more, on a level that politics deserves, and not just this like kind of video game atmosphere that we seem to be in right now. But I just feel like this seems to be the world now. Like the parties are more ideologically uniform. So we don't have these weird coalitions. We don't have a lot of liberal Republicans. We don't have a lot of conservative Democrats. There are a few, but not nearly as many as, just a couple, 2 decades ago. And I feel like that we should just sort of brace for that this is kind of the way it's going to be, at least until something, some truly big upturning of our political system happens, because it seems like this is the way that the country is kind of evenly divided. It's like a 49-49 II country, it seems.
Yeah. Well, Republicans have really run with this mandate as a reason or rationale for doing all the things that they're doing. And they're saying that because, yes, Trump won the White House, and Republicans, 77 million people voted for Trump. 77 million people. Yeah, well, 74 plus million people did not vote for him.
Right.
And it was a 1.5 point, national popular vote victory, along with the Electoral College, of course. And they won the Senate and held the House by the narrow margins that you're talking about. But they have taken that. And I don't know, this episode is not to talk about whether it's a mandate or not. Republicans clearly believe that it was, and that's going to guide their actions. But their accountability, we talked about the lack of Trump accountability, but the accountability for Republicans will come in 2026 in the midterm elections. But that is still almost 2 years away. We're a long way from that, and a long way from knowing if voters are satisfied with the direction of the country, satisfied with the state of the economy. There was a fascinating chart. I'm going to attribute it to Axios. I apologize if it wasn't. We talked about voters' feelings about the economy. And right now, for some reason, Republicans are a lot more excited or a lot more confident in the strength of the economy than what they were just a couple of weeks ago. And it's because we look at everything through this partisan lens. The economy is not that different now than it was on January the 19th. But because people filter it through the political partisan lens first, it goes in, and Democrats are more pessimistic about the economy now in that same chart. So we're in a tough cycle. A tough cycle. I'm not talking about the 2026 election cycle, just the rhythmic cycle of viewing things through the partisan lens. And we just make there was also reporting about Speaker Johnson telling, I believe, fellow Republicans at their retreat that Republicans are going to be in control of the House for a decade. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe
not.
it could, but it's also, they might not even have it 2 years from now. So we just have to take it step by step here.
Also, I mean, again, when you have 3 votes to spare, I mean, you're one, plane delay, bus breaking down, people getting stuck in an elevator away from not having the votes. I mean, that's just not, I mean, when I just feel like the days of one party winning back the House in particular by winning 40 seats, like we saw low 6 years ago, or the Republicans when they gained what was it, like 63 seats or something like that in 2010.
63.
It was, yeah. I mean, they just, it was crazy. I mean, it's almost unimaginable, and yet it's only been a few years. It seems like a long time ago, but it's just a few cycles ago.
And I want to be very careful with this because we're talking in the immediate aftermath of a terrible tragedy. But in the press conference on Wednesday night, Senator Moran talked about how he's been on that flight, right? That is a regular Wichita to DC flight that he advocated for. He advocated for it. And when we're talking about these margins, tragedies and accidents can have an impact on it, not just special elections because of people taking other jobs or leaving. It's a very tight margin. And so I know Republicans have to just, you go with, when you have the control, you go with it. But there's also the sad reality that you could hold it loosely because that might not be the case for a long time.
Right. No, it's, I mean, we've saw, the initial vote to impeach, Alejandro Mayorkas in the last Congress. The Republicans thought they had it, and they didn't because they had a few people absent, and then one Democrat who they thought was going to be in the hospital still recovering from surgery showed up like in his hospital gown to vote. I mean, and again, this does feel that feels unstable. That feels chaotic. That like a vote to impeach like a cabinet officer could come down to who's less sick at that given time. And again, I appreciate, again, I am serious about like I'm going to try to like temper my language, with politics and get away from some of the violent and martial sort of metaphors that are just a part of political coverage. But I do think that as you stated, what Moran was saying, like I could have been on that flight. That's a flight I've taken, to DCA from Wichita. This is a part of life, and I think that if anything, I know that journalists aren't supposed to prescribe things, but I'm like, let's keep our heads about this, as not just as journalists, not just as political observers, not just as members of Congress or people in the White House staff, but everybody, like keep your heads about you, because this, we're in a really weird, uncertain time, and I just feel like it's worth sometimes taking a deep breath, taking a step back, particularly in really tragic, circumstances like the one that we're seeing now.
And part of the cycle, what I would consider the bad cycle that I was talking about, that I don't know how we get out of it, is that there is an incentive when you're in the minority to bash the government and those that are in charge of the government when you're not in control, right? That is how you have to convince voters to fire the people that are in charge. And usually that is because they are not doing a good job running the government. And so I don't know how how we sort of build trust. I think that we could use some trust in the institutions that we have, because they have lasted this long, and I think can persevere. Not that they're perfect, but there's always that incentive as the minority, the out party, to bash what the current. And I'm open to suggestions from anyone about how voters will because unfortunately voters respond they respond better to negative information or negative, rather than just, hey, things are going great, but I will be better. Like that's going to be
I'm satisfied with 3% GDP growth, in the coming year. I don't know either. I don't have the answers, on that. I do know that, I was just talking the other day to a friend in Britain, and she was discussing how, right after Brexit, it was just like, what's happening? Like, and bad things happened, and then they kind of stabilized, but they went through a period of time where again, the Liz Truss prime minister, her time as prime minister, like they had the head of cabbage, like what was, remember this? It was like, will this head of cabbage last longer than Liz Truss's term of office? And the cabbage lasted longer. That's again, it's just this absurdity, but it really was probably a coping mechanism for people in Britain to just think like, things are just remarkably unstable right now. And they eventually did work themselves out. We're different than Britain. I get it. We have a different form of government. We left the British Empire.
I heard about that.
But it's worth maybe stating, like, we don't know how. Let's just acknowledge that this is chaotic and maybe not the best of times.
Yeah, and for some people, particularly some of the people that just took office and are taking positions, the chaos, I believe, is part of the goal, right? That they believe that the system needs to be chaos because the status quo is bad. And we just have to wait to see whether their ideas, whether they work to improve people's lives and improve the government, or they don't. And that's when some of the politicians will be held accountable in the midterm elections. That is part of our process. But
we will find out if Americans want their government to be run like an unstable technology company. Yes, or a social media platform.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Nathan. And again, I hope I'm not apologizing too much. That usually, we we joke around a lot, we have fun, and sort of talk about some of the absurdities in Congress and life in general. But I felt like this is a more accurate representation right now, I think, where a lot of people's heads are. So thank you.
Hey,
I appreciate talking about it.
Don't have to apologize to me. I think these are important. These are important topics.
All right. Word of the week. Before we get to the word of the week, I wanted to just issue a short correction. Last week, I was talking about the president's room as a part of the words of the week. And I think I said president's room several times, and then I signed off with, and that's the Senate room. So it is indeed the president's room. It's located in the Senate side of the Capitol, but it is the president's room. So political theater regrets the error. I know you're not supposed to repeat the error in a correction, but
mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made, yes, to use the passive voice, my least favorite form of communication. This week's word of the week is impoundment. This term has been sort of bandied about a little bit because of the debate over who gets to ultimate say over how money is appropriated. Well, Article 1 of the Constitution states that that's Congress that has the power over the purse and appropriated funds. Impoundment, though, is the act of a president refusing to spend money that's been appropriated by Congress. The last big challenge on this before President Donald Trump took office again was under the Nixon administration, and there were debates about the constitutionality of him impounding money, choosing not to spend money that had been appropriated by Congress and which he himself had signed into law. The constitutionality of it, has been questioned whether a president has that authority or not, including by the current former OMB, Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought, who is also the current nominee to head OMB. He thinks that the Budget Control Act of 1974, at least the part of it which concerns impounding, forbidding a president from impounding money, is unconstitutional. So this is a debate we're still having. But the term impoundment, in terms, at least in governmental circles and in money in Congress, means when a president refuses to spend money which has been appropriated by the Congress. So that's your word of the week: impoundment.
And Jason, can I admit that I get confused easily? I know I'm supposed to know everything because every political theater podcast guest is always all knowing. But
yes,
there were times on Wednesday and even before where it was about what was being rescinded. There was the freeze, and then there was a rescinded, but it was just the OMB memo that was rescinded. Or I still am not completely clear about what's going on.
If you are confused, Nathan, and if other people are confused, that simply means you're paying attention. That is the correct. That is the most correct reaction that I can think of. The courts froze the freeze memo from OMB. And then the White House OMB office rescinded the memo, which we thought that's the directive to freeze the funds. And then, as you said, we got the White House press secretary saying that no, just the memo has been rescinded, not the act of freezing the funds itself. What it comes down to, again, this is still in the courts. We've seen judges who are open to halting it altogether. This will take a little more time to play out, but it seems like this sort of debacle is that the money is apparently flowing again. But again, I can't confirm that it's going everywhere, but I do know that this has caused no small bit of trauma for Meals on Wheels and places like that don't exactly come up when people are referring to the deep state, food pantries and so forth. So again, if you're confused, it just means you're paying attention.
Well, I think it's a good word. I don't think I even knew that the word impoundment existed until a couple years ago when it started to kind of filter in, and now it's a very important word. So well done.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners out there. We'll be back another time in the coming weeks. with most often, at least occasionally, with our friend Nathan Gonzalez here. But come back for the ones where he's not here too. We try our best. We can't have Nathan on all the time.
Definitely do the other ones. See ya.
All right. Thanks again for listening. Thank you, Nathan.